On live. Hold on.
All right. Hello and good afternoon and welcome to the November CUNY Black Male Initiative Town Hall. I am your host, Dr. Shawn Best, the University Director for the CUNY Black Male Initiative. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I'm so glad to be back with you again, hosting a town hall conversation entitled this month, Where Do We Go From Here? Looking Back and Moving Forward. We have three very esteemed guests with us today, and we're going to jump right into a conversation because we only have about a half an hour with one of our guests that you'll recognize quite easily right away. But I do want to just give a quick overview of just why we do these town halls and why they are important for our CUNY BMI community. As many of you know, the CUNY Black Male Initiative supports thousands of Black and Latino males who are at the university system with the efforts to graduate and to pursue their careers beyond college, but also CUNY BMI is open to anybody who wants to be a part of it. We're open to any student who wants to join, who's a CUNY student. We serve students at every single level, from high school equivalency to community college, senior colleges, as well as law school and graduate school. So we have a robust group of young people that we've been serving for 15 years now, since 2005. With a robust, promising model from Medgar Evers that has now expanded to 31 projects across the 25 CUNY institutions. And so I'm so lucky to do this job and to have a team member with my University Assistant Director, Jorge Alguera, who's the producer for this session, helping support. And also he's a CUNY law student at 1L, helping us support these efforts to bring information and education to our community and to stay plugged in and engaged with those who are doing this great work of bringing equity and justice to Black and Brown communities, not only at CUNY, but around the city and around the world, around our country and around our neighborhoods. And so our conversation is about where do we go from here? Obviously, we just went through a crazy election period, maybe the craziest one I've ever seen in recent history in my lifetime. And we know that our communities have been threatened openly with voter suppression. We've been emotionally handcuffed and held hostage by an atmosphere of fear that has been a reign of terror that's been around this administration for the last 4 years. We know that a lot of times we're dealing with misinformation, death because of disproportionate effects of COVID-19, isolation, confusion, high anxiety, and whatever else can happen on a daily basis that affects our communities. And obviously, with the coup that's even happening right now with a sitting president who is outspokenly intending not to give up the seat or the office to the president-elect, we know that we need to have these conversations crucially in a moment like this. So this conversation today is an opportunity for us to critically and candidly think about and have articulated insights about the concerns, fears, assessments, points of views, and perspectives regarding what's unfolding to us in real time regarding our national and local elections. Many of you know we had some amazing people in our last conversation with Mondaire Jones and Richie Torres and some amazing council members who have been elected. We had Donovan Richards. We've had so many people who have been elected as the first Black council member in their area, or the first openly gay, or the first of many kinds. And we know that with Kamala Harris, she's the first of many that I'll read later. We know Joe Biden's the first of many as well. And so we know there's a lot of firsts happening, and we have some great conversation pieces that are set up for today with three people who are the first in many of their areas who are going to be talking and bringing some insights. So I'm going to do a quick overview of who we have today, and we're going to jump right into questions so we can get this conversation going. First, we have Bob Law, who is an on-air host of WBAI 99.5 FM, often called the godfather of Black talk radio. Bob Law remains a legend, a legendary on-air radio host, personality, political and social justice advocate as well. He hosts a show From the Streets on Saturdays from 11 to 12. And we're going to talk about, Bob, just your journey with that, as well as the neighborhood you currently live in and the challenges that you face. So Bob, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We also have an esteemed a person who I'm excited to get to know, who I've never met before. We have Jade Arundel here, who's the co-founder of the Center for Racial Justice and Education, and also the CEO of Victory of the People, LLC. And so she's a native of DC, but also has roots in Brooklyn as well. And she's done so many things over her career, including really just making sure that there are Black supported and Black owned opportunities in developing curriculum, workshops, affinity spaces, and events for the purposes of empowering and undoing internalized, institutionalized, and interpersonal racial oppression amongst Black people, amongst people of African descent. So Jade, I cannot wait to talk to you. Thank you for joining us. It's good to have you here. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Yes, and I am not the co-founder or CEO of the Center for Racial Justice, but I'm the co-founder and CEO of Victory of the People Movement, and I am a consultant at the Center for Racial Justice and Education.
Look, and I just gave you a whole new job title without even realizing it. Thank you. My bad, but I'm so glad you corrected that, and it's really great to have you here. Finally, Jumani Williams, you all may know him from being the New York City Public Advocate. We also acknowledged him also back at the CUNY BMI Spring Benefit 2 years ago at BMCC. But he is a self-described Democratic socialist, and he's a powerhouse. I tell y'all, I was at the Until Freedom March about a month ago down in Central Park West, and he's always bringing the heat and the fire to these conversations because he cares about equity in every single way, and he advocates for people in every single way. So I think, Jumani, you always represent a voice that represents a lot of CUNY BMI students, not only being someone who identifies as male, but also someone who has some Caribbean roots as well, has some Brooklyn roots as well, and also has aspirations to go up in your political career to make change at a larger level. So thank you for being here. And I know we have you briefly, but I'm so glad you're here today, man.
Thank you. Peace and blessings. Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right, so let's jump right into it. I have so many questions, but I wanted to start with you, Jumani, because I know that you have been somebody who's formally run for office. You are probably currently thinking about your next steps in office as well. And obviously, you know, when you took over, when Letitia James was the public advocate, I think in a lot of ways, she might have even set the tone for what maybe some doorways and pathways even for your own self and for the career. So I just want to just kind of ask you, with the momentum that we have now with voter urgency that came from this election, seeing record numbers of people being turned out to vote, especially Black and brown voices, how can we actually use that momentum to move forward the agenda for what Biden and Harris are going to be doing in this presidency, but also impacting the local elections and midterm elections and local representation? How do you think we maintain this momentum? And what do you think are some of the good things that came out of this time period that we can benefit from and use to galvanize ourselves going forward?
I appreciate that. That's a hell of a question. I might make it a little hot in my answer, just so you know. But I'm thankful to be here with all of you, the esteemed panel. But I do want to give a special hat tip to Bob Law. I want to make sure I do that. And I respect, he's been doing this work for such a long time. We looked up to him when we were in college and trying to figure things out. So I'm honored to be on with him. I want to make sure I paid him due respect. For me, this was really about triage. It was about stopping the bleeding. Frankly, not now the biggest Biden-Harris fan. I will say that. I do have to create space for Black women. That's a standalone statement. So what Kamala means to Black women is very real. I don't want to take anything away from that. But to triage for me was stopping the bleeding, was getting rid of that man in the White House. But in triage, if you don't keep working, you can still lose the patient. And so we can't think that we're anywhere close to out of the blue right now. I'm hoping we can galvanize the energy right now. One of the things that happens after we got President Obama elected, we just backed off. Hey, we did it, first Black president. And we know now that just is not the case. And so we have an election coming up in January. We have midterms coming in 2 years. And there's a lot of local elections that are coming up as well. We tend to look at federal, but we have to look at local as well. And oftentimes we don't want to admit that the local problems, not Republicans, they're Democrats who are in office who need to be held accountable as well. Democrats who are in office locally that cause some of the same issues that we blame the Republican Party for. And so my hope is that we can keep this energy. And people don't listen apparently unless we're in the streets. So I hope we kind of stay in there safely, as we might be entering a second wave, or on social media feed, but pushing the noise. We have to get Democrats in general to have the courage to have certain conversations. And so I hear them now screaming, defund the police did this, defund the police did that. But what we should have done as leaders was grab that conversation. We allowed that conversation to be taken away and turned to something that it wasn't. And we have to have the courage now to have conversations about what public safety actually means and what law enforcement's role is in that. And when you have that conversation, believe it or not, most folks will tend to agree. But people want to take that message because it's helpful for them in other places. So we have to have the courage to continue that conversation in a very real way, understanding that both Republicans and Democrats' primary goal is usually incumbency protection, to get reelected, to go in higher office. And that's both of them. But we have to really kind of pull them out of that. And we did see a lot of that happen, I believe, here in New York. And we saw that when you don't have those conversations, when you're afraid, when you're teetering back and forth, you know, the other side can come in and take advantage of that. So my hope is really now, I'll be heading down to Georgia at some point to try to help with those 2 Senate seats. But that's not the be all and the end all. And we have to just keep this pressure really intense. We have somebody there that at least we can speak with now. So that in itself is a plus.
Yes. And so, Jumaane, would you mind just expanding a little bit for me, and for us, the audience? You talked about some of the changes that de Blasio has committed to making about maybe cutting the budget for maybe the first time ever, and actually allowing for there to be more social, more mental health support professionals to replace some of the responsibilities of the police department. Could you talk about what that means for us and what that looks like? Is that plan activated right now?
You know, I don't know how hot to make it. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. So I will say that this administration has come nowhere close to what it promised when it ran both times. And we have to make sure folks are accountable to that. And our mayor is a Democrat, and our governor is a Democrat. And both of them, I think, have a lot more work they can do on these issues. My office put out not too long ago a paper, a report on what we can do around mental health. And there's a lot of good things in the report. I invite everyone to go to advocate.nyc.gov and take a look at that. The biggest sticking point with the administration, however, was that they firmly believe that police should be responding to mental health calls. And they tried to, you know, okay, they'll do it with this person, they'll do it that. And that was a fundamental point. Like, no, we do not need police officers responding to people who are in mental health crisis. We need to have a number that can divert a criminal response and get a health response to these folks. And as much as they were talking about things they were trying to do, that was a very big sticking point and a problematic point. And then they had this crisis intervention team, which at least was a little better than what was there. And then abruptly, a couple months ago, they cut that program. So there's another program they instituted, which actually takes some of the ideas that we had in the report, which we're thankful of, but there's no real meat to it yet. We don't know where it's going to be. They said it's a small pilot program. I don't even think if it takes up any whole precinct. They're not building out the infrastructure. We spent over $1 billion on Thrive NYC. We don't have $1 billion to show for it in terms of results. So all these things are problematic, and we have to continue to push. But you know, the biggest thing is really this conversation needs to move from reforming police to redefining and reimagining what public safety is. Minnesota had all of the reforms that we could have thought about, most of them, almost 95% of them, and we still had George Floyd. And so it is a fundamental question. What makes communities safe? Are we funding those things? And then what's law enforcement's role in this? I believe they have a role to play, but too often we're equating public safety with law enforcement, and we see the results.
Yeah, love it, love it. Thank you for sharing that detail. And we do certainly have to hold our public officials accountable for the things they promise. And yeah, please.
I'm sorry. NYPD was probably the only agency in the city that wasn't defunded. So I want to be clear about that. All this hoopla about defund police, NYPD, you look at the Department of Education, the Department of Youth Community Development, every other agency was cut by a lot. The NYPD was the only one that was allowed to hire additional personnel in the frame of additional police officers.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to expand on that a little bit, and I'm going to go to Jade first and then Bob. You both can answer this question, but just thinking about like, you know, the impact of these kinds of policies that affect Black and brown people, and we look at this new administration that's coming in, what do we need to be holding our leaders, what should be expecting them to do to advance the Black agenda in terms of supporting Black and brown people, bringing equity to that, to those communities? And do we believe that maybe to a degree, I know there's a lot of people who are friends of mine and colleagues who feel like, yeah, even though we're happy Biden-Harris has won, it's not always 100% clear whether the black vote has been really valued by the Democratic Party or has been really advanced in terms of our mission to get people more equity in our communities. So what do you feel like is the onus on our leadership for this next phase, both nationally and locally, to make sure that Black people are empowered and that their voice is being valued in the communities that you live in, as well as just nationally? So I'll start with Jade and then go to Bob.
Great, thank you for that question. If you hear fire alarms in the background, I'm not in danger, it's just being tested. It's gonna stop really soon. Unfortunately, we have a situation where the Black vote has been pimped by the Democratic Party consistently, at least for the last 50 years. So what do I expect a Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris administration presidency to do for Black people? Absolutely nothing. The same benign neglect and pandering to the Black vote that took place before the election is going to continue when they get into the White House if organizers and other elected officials don't hold them accountable for delivering anything to Black people. I have been one of those people who've been out there advocating for abolishing the police, as well as, defunding the police, and then establishing community control of policing. The same people who've also been out there screaming Black Lives Matter and advocating, calling out white supremacists and these race soldiers in law enforcement who are killing Black and brown bodies. Those are the same people, many of them whom are happy that Senator Kamala Harris and Joe Biden will be in the White House when in fact they are very, very pro-police and want to perhaps increase funding for police officers. So we have a situation where we have groups like Black Lives Matter Global Network who are now begging to meet with Biden and Harris after using their platforms to deliver a Black vote with nothing in return. Unfortunately, we have to be in a position where we're advocating unapologetically for and consistently for a Black agenda. And I say this also as a voting member of the Kings County Democratic, County Committee representing the 43rd Assembly District. I don't foresee anything changing. I see more benign neglect happening, and it's really up to the grassroots and other people who are in office to really hold a line for many of these Democratic candidates. Many of these mayors and governors of these states where these police killings by law enforcement onto Black people have taken place, they're Democrat-run cities. Final thing I will say is we have to stop attributing white supremacy and racism with those people on the right, meaning the Republicans and the Trump administration, and ignoring the anti-Black racism that also takes place in the Democratic Party.
Ooh, yes, preach it, girl. That's real. And so I love that. And Bob, I'd love for you to expand on that too, because obviously you have some years seeing this game, this political game, and where often, like even in the Clinton era, that's the first era I can really remember as a young person, where the vote was pandered to us for us to vote for this, what everyone called the first Black president being Clinton, but then having these laws that completely destroyed our communities. So what ways do you think, Bob, are effective to hold our leaders accountable to making sure that we're moving the needle in the right direction so there is equity in our communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it is necessary to be clear what has just happened with this election. It was, as Jumani pointed out, we felt like we didn't have a choice. We had to get Trump out of the White House. And I don't think that people voted for Biden and Harris as much as they voted against Trump. I agree with Jade. The Black vote has been marginalized. There's a lot of applauding the Black voters, but not responding in kind, not responding with anything of value in return for the Black vote. What people are doing is celebrating the fact that Black people came out and delivered the vote. In this last election, Black people delivered America from itself. Black people delivered America from fascism for a minute, have delivered America from Trumpism, which translates into fascism. But the Black vote, but not that. The point is, though, that my concern is that people are going to try to go back to business as usual. Black people have been encouraged and even taught to participate in the political process as a spectator sport, so that we will vote. And we think that getting our candidate in office is the only goal of the vote. And once we have the candidate in office, they are then able to go back to business as usual. As Jumani, as everybody has pointed out, there are some midterm elections. When is the mayoral race in New York City? Is it that next year?
Next year.
It's next year. We need to be prepared for that race. Right now, my concern is that Black people might start celebrating a Biden-Harris victory and are taking really no steps whatsoever to influence the outcome of the mayoral race. Like it or not, this is where we are. This is America. This is New York City. There's going to be a mayoral race next year. There are going to be issues that are affected by who becomes the mayor. Our lives are going to be affected by who becomes the mayor. We have a need to influence that process. And my concern is that we are not actually moving on any level into a position of being able to influence policy. We are waiting to see who's going to run, and then we're going to ask them what are they going to do for whatever issue we raise. We will say to the candidates for mayor, what are you going to do for public education? You have talked about moving forward with the Black agenda. What Black agenda? Who has developed the Black agenda? What are the items on the Black agenda? How did the Black agenda even emerge? There is no Black agenda. But the Black agenda is to ask the candidates for office, what do you do about this? What do you do about that? What if we would have, instead of saying, what are you going to do for public education? What if we really got some educators together and developed a platform about education? And we said to the candidate for mayor, here's what we want you to do. Will you do this, yes or no? And say that on every level. Here's what we want you to do. Will you do this, yes or no? We've not moved to that point. The Black vote, this whole idea of Biden and Harris is as the answer. Biden and Harris is by no means the answer. That is not where the struggle ends. This struggle has a need to continue. We are talking, Biden and Harris, or the Democratic administration is talking about reaching out to the 70 million people who voted for Trump. My concern is that as they reach out and try to form alliances with the dark side, that we are not marginalized in that process. It is right up under our nose. They will be reaching out to work out some kind of relationship and invite the people, the Trumpian people, and to come across the aisle, so to speak. But what we have to make sure that in doing that, that our concerns are not freely dismissed. And so what do I expect from the political leadership right now? I don't expect anything from the political leadership nationally, locally. I think that there is a need for us to change that leadership. I think there's a need for us to get more and more progressive people, insightful people, talented people, competent people in public office. We have, a lot of people who are bright and conscious don't want to be involved in the political process. So they see through it and they don't want to be bothered. So therefore, only a few people who are really quality people run for public office. Most of them are political hacks, but I can't be mad at them because other people have surrendered the political territory to the hacks and then complain that the hacks don't perform. The hacks never said they would perform. You know, they have made it clear that they are in it. As Jumani pointed out, they are in it for their own personal gratification, their own career plans. They've never said that they were in it on behalf of their constituents. I believe that one of the things that is really necessary is that we start looking at putting competent, conscious people in those positions so that we can influence policy.
Yeah. So Bob, I want to expand on that a little bit, because I think, you know, thinking about these conscious, competent people, I see a few right here on this call, and I feel like we are talking about advocacy and coming from a Black-based infrastructure community. You know, I feel like if you are Caribbean descent, African descent, you know, you are Dominican, you Black. You Mexican, you Black, right? So I put this responsibility on us to create the collective, sort of these collective voices together to really move and make powerful advocacy. And so since we have the New York City Public Advocate here, Jumaane, I want to just ask you, I know we only have a few more minutes with you before you have to take off, but just as the New York City Advocate, you think about advocacy, a lot of times issues that affect Black communities are lumped in with issues that affect other things. So there's this new term now, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color, or sometimes it's just lumped in with also LGBTQ+, and I have no problem supporting it and obviously making sure that those needs, those communities are being addressed also. But a lot of times, because the agenda that helps support Black faces is typically lumped in with other marginalized communities, how do we ensure that there's advocacy that's specifically for Black communities in our political office? And what do you say to even to those young leaders that Bob were talking about, the talented ones that are coming into office for the first time, you know, the Richie Torreses and the Mondaire Jones and the people who are now taking over in these offices and places that had never had somebody of color before? How do we continue to advocate and make sure that issues for Black communities are still pushed forward?
So the just in the basis of how this country was founded, Black is meant to be a scary thing. Like saying Black is meant to scare people. So we have to push away from this. So the issues with Black Lives Matter was you were saying Black. You could have probably said any other lives matter and you wouldn't get this kind of pushback. I tried not to play oppression Olympics as much as possible. I would have to say, even though I say that, no matter where you are in the communities you spoke about, the darker you are, the more problems you'll probably have. So the further away you are from being a cisgender straight white man, particularly who's rich in this country, the worse off you're going to be. So being a Black trans woman, you see why they're being murdered with impunity in this country. And so I don't have a problem with however people want to identify, you know, BIPOC or Afro-Caribbean or whatever it is. I do have a problem if it means the erasure of what the Black community means. And it's important because, you know, people don't want to talk about it. There are sadly cultures that have been able to, they shouldn't have to, but have in the past gotten here and were able to assimilate just because of the culture that they are. You know, Black folks can't. You can see who we are and decide for yourself immediately how I'm going to respond. That's an important experience to be able to remain as a real thing. And so we have to kind of unpack, and even ourselves, by the way, we were trained Black. I mean, when I was growing up, being African, being Haitian, those were insulting words that we created. And so we have to intentionally unpack some of those and unpack the colorism issues that we have. That's stuff we have to do internally. But we have to make sure that we're very specifically and intentionally discussing what we need for the Black community and not be afraid of that and to be unabashed about it. That doesn't mean, as public advocate, I'm not lifting everybody up. I always lift everybody up. My job is to figure out what is preventing you individually, your community, from living the best life that you can and trying to remove that blockade. So that's what it needs to be done. And the Black community needs to do the similar things for themselves. And so whenever circle they come into, I think it's fine because we are powerful together, but we can't lose that I'm here or whoever's representing or trying to push what is needed for Black communities. What does it mean to be a Black woman? What does it mean to be a Black LGBT? What does it mean to be Black trans? Because it means something a lot different in those communities. Even in the LGBT community, the white experience of being in that community is much different than it is from the Black experience of being in that community. And we just have to make sure of that. In terms of the other question, and I appreciate, Bob Law saying that, more people need to get involved in this thing, because it used to be, thankfully, we've seen changes even in the city council and stuff from 09, but it used to be the political hacks. You were an attorney, you were part of a club, you get in there and it's about running the same system that was there. Jade made it real hot, so I feel comfortable. I'm not gonna be the hottest person here, but the governor just tried to get rid of the Working Families Party and was trying to get Republicans elected so there wouldn't be a Democratic majority. That stuff was really happening. So you look at what's happening in the White House, but locally here, the decisions that were made in the pandemic happened from the governor and the mayor. And so we have to be clear about that. And it doesn't always mean just putting a black face there, because we put sometimes black face and they continue the same system that's there. And so we have to make sure we're putting people in place who understand and will be held to the accountability that the seat that they're holding is not more important than the people that they're representing.
Yes, sir.
And it's not more important than doing the job you're supposed to. And I always come from the point, I didn't get elected to get reelected or go to higher office. I don't know what's going to happen. Both those things are cool. But my job is to represent the people that I was sent there to represent. Hopefully that moves me forward. And it may not. And we have to be okay with that so that we can fight for the real thing that we're supposed to fight for.
That's right. Well, I appreciate that, Jumani. Thank you for lending your voice and your time and your energy to this work. I know you're committed to it as a lifestyle, not just a role that you get paid for. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking the time, and hopefully we'll see you again soon on the other side with some more work down the road, okay?
Thank you. Peace and blessings to you all. Love and light. Thank you.
All right
now.
Awesome. Yeah, so Jade, I'd love for you to unpack a little bit of this question as well in terms of that framework of just like Black identity. How do we obviously leverage intersectionality with being Black and other, as well as just looking at how do we actually, what I find to be true now, I think a lot of companies and organizations and colleges are using the diversity and inclusion framework and title to appease the sense that the Black agenda has been met or Black people are being served. And sometimes there's no intentional, or you can't really see the impacts of it. Kind of similar to what Jumani said about, you might see a budget that's committed, but then what are the results? What are the actual changes you see? So when you think about this idea of advancing advocacy for Black and brown people, how can we leverage intersectionality and also just decode the DEI things that are happening that sometimes submerge, the issues and kind of make people feel appeased, like something's being done when actually it's just a phrase that maybe sometimes isn't really helping us move forward.
Thank you for that. The first thing I'm going to say is that I'm not a POC or a bi-POC. I'm a Black woman. I do not identify as a person of color. I feel like my Blackness is diminished and made to be invisible when people refer to me as anything other than Black. I'm a Black nationalist as well as a Pan-Africanist, okay? And with that said, I also do understand the healing that must take place for all people of African descent the world over, and unpacking intraculturally how racism and white supremacy and anti-Black racism has infected and affected us, right? And I think that within the social justice world, there seems to be this, this unfair expectation that Black folks are supposed to be the moral compass of the world, or we're supposed to carry on all of this humanitarian changes and causes for every other group, every other demographic or racial group. And so I stand firm and very confident of being a Black person first, by being B1 Black first. In terms of intersectionality, I see challenges with it. I see ways in which intersectional identities, when we're talking about Black liberation, Black sovereignty, and justice for Black people, how many other identities that are competing identities within the Black community kind of push one's Blackness or a Black agenda to the back burner. And so I think that it's really important for Black folk to really get on code and to make sure that we're advocating for justice for all Black people all the time. So I don't put my gender or my sexual orientation above being Black. And I also hold my ethnic group of being indigenous to this country as a Black indigenous person, because there were African people here before Columbus even came here, right? And so my unique Blackness as originating from the killing fields of American slavery and these plantations is a unique experience within and of itself. And so oftentimes when we just see every person, melanated person as a Black person as having the same experience when it comes on to white supremacy and colonialism or how we function politically, I think that gets really, really dangerous. So in terms of diversity and inclusion, I think it's important for us to work across racial lines and across other identities to be in a commitment daily to undo a system of anti-Black racism and just white supremacy in general, for everyone. But I also do see myself as being, and my cultural experience as being a Black person, as separate and apart and different from, someone who might identify as brown, because, within the Latinx community, for example, you could be white and Latinx, you can be indigenous or brown or Black and Latinx. And so it's a culture comprised of many ethnic groups and also other racial identities. And so I have a problem with folks lumping in or just saying Black and brown or people of color and not really focusing on the issue of Blackness, because I feel like every racial demographic in this country and abroad have various ways in which they interact with oppression and white supremacy.
That's real. That's real. And I love that. I love the unapologetic perspective and vision you have about embracing Blackness and understand that's Black people everywhere in the world, no matter where you go, are the ones that are experiencing more marginalization in general. And so if we're not really putting that at the forefront, then it's really hard to actually move forward an agenda that really centers around equity in our communities. And so with that being said, Bob, I'm thinking about just like the idea of advocacy in these different areas that we hope this administration can move us forward in. When I think about the impacts of COVID-19, when I think about housing, when I think about childcare services, when I think about the trauma that Black communities go through, when I think about having access to psychological services, and also just even food supplies. I mean, I live in Harlem where it's still a food desert. I mean, granted we have a Whole Foods now, but not everybody can afford to shop at Whole Foods, right? So when you think about holding leaders accountable and how do we move forward, going forward, thinking about Black communities and these issues that this administration vows in some ways to actually support and protect for Black communities, what have you seen that has worked? What do you think we can do going forward that could work?
There's a lot of questions in your question. Talk about unpacking. We need to unpack your questions. I think that what is really necessary is clarity, and on the part of the people. This administration has not promised to address anything that is critical to changing the condition of oppressed people, poor people, Black people. They haven't promised anything. But it is not clear to our community that this administration at the national level, the administration at the city level, it's not clear how our needs are being ignored. It's kind of like see, when you talk about the administration and as well as here in New York City, the narrative is one of healing, and we're all in this together. And so that becomes the narrative. However, there's a distinction to be made between healing and repairing the damage. And so they have not agreed or proposed to repair the damage. The administrations have agreed to find ways to heal. That is not our problem. When you look at, when you mention food and hunger, and what kind of things can we do, like you said, not everyone can afford an expensive store like Whole Foods. But so the answer has to be to improve their income level, take people up out of poverty, not create programs where we're going to make it a little bit easier for you to exist while you remain poor. What we have to do is address why you were poor so that you can afford to buy food wherever you want to buy food, affordable housing. Our problem is, if you see, when you address the food issue and we feed poor people, see, that is a hunger issue. They are hungry. We provide the food, they eat the food, they're no longer hungry, but they're still poor. The strategy has to be to change the condition of the people. And that is not what any administration has been advocating. When we talk about across racial lines, you know, Jade is correct. We have to be unapologetically Black. There are a number of people, however, who are claiming that they are unapologetically Black, but they are already steeped in compromise and concession while saying that I'm unapologetically Black. They're not quite clear what being unapologetically Black actually means. So that.
Can you give me an example of that, Bob? I think that's a good point. Can you give me an example of how that happens? Like, what is a position or a role of someone who might use their Blackness to get into a certain position, but they're already kind of have co-signed and they're steeped in the supremacy tactics of that organization and don't have any voice anymore because they're using that platform to advance their own causes? Can you think of an example of where that exists?
Now that Jumani's gone, you want to get me the one to put everybody else in trouble. There are
Let's get into some good trouble.
There are elected officials. That might be the answer that might help understand this. Get in good trouble. That's John Lewis's line. Mm-hmm. John Lewis is a congressman that many people were comfortable with. Many whites in Georgia and around the country were comfortable with. And so John is a person who would easily be characterized as unapologetically Black. But throughout his career, from SNCC on into Congress, he was not faking now. He really was committed to alliances with the adversary. And he was committed, you know, when SNCC moved to Black Power, that is when John Lewis moved away from SNCC. And John was opposed to Black Power. John was opposed to Stokely becoming chairman of SNCC. But he would be considered unapologetically Black because he will speak up. You know, he will, but he was careful. And it wasn't that he was really faking anything. He felt it in his heart. You know, when we were coming up in SNCC and in the Black consciousness movement and stuff, we had many, many debates with each other about self-determination, moving forward. I mean, and everybody did not agree. But for instance, I just interviewed a sister who did a book called Black Privilege. And she interviewed a number of people, about 50 people in New York City, young Black people, who represent the new Black middle class. And many of them, the people that she interviewed, almost all of them said that they were unapologetically Black. They also said that they were very careful not to offend whites, they tried to anticipate what white people would approve of. For instance, if it was a brother who is a competent, he worked I think in an investment bank, he was qualified for his job, he was competent, he was doing the job, he was proud of his Blackness. However, he likes hip hop and he DJs on the weekend, but he did not ever want his coworkers to know that he liked hip hop. He didn't want them to know that he DJs on the weekend. But in talking to him, he said he was unapologetically Black. That's from not understanding what being Black means in this society. Right. Unapologetically Black is that we are entitled to have deserved strategies that are going to repair the damage done to Black people. So when we look at returning to business as usual, that is not an option for Black people. We cannot return to the Black community after the pandemic. We have to renew the Black community. And we need priorities set. The Black elected officials, the white elected officials, the political, the policymakers, they have to make repairing the damage done to Black folk a priority, as opposed to we're all in this together theology, where we will gradually make the necessary changes or do what we have to do. The concerns of Black people are always marginalized as what's good. We have to think in terms of what's good for everybody. One of the things that is true about the Black struggle in this country, the Black struggle was the only struggle that liberated everybody. When white women were trying to get the vote, the suffragette movement, they meant only white women. They didn't mean Black women, Native women. They didn't mean Black men. And when they found out that there was a movement that might occur where Black men would get the vote before them, they went berserk. They were racist as anybody else. But when we struggled for the right to vote, that included everybody now has the right to vote. Any issue that we have taken up, if we take up the issue of public education, and if we are, to the extent that we are successful, everybody in the public school system, Black, brown, white, whatever, everybody benefits. Our movement has always been the movement that has been the most humanitarian of all the movements in this country. It is our movement that has always lifted everybody right along with us. And when we look at what Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia, now we have to look at, so now what are Biden and Harris going to do with Stacey Abrams? And see, most Black folk are pleased that she gets applauded. And everybody on the talk shows, everybody on MSNBC and CNN and wherever else except Fox 5, everybody else is praising Stacey Abrams and the good work that she has done. And for most Black people, that is sufficient. Just praise us, and we will be satisfied. That is what has to change. And so it comes back really. See, like I say, there are distinctions that need to be made across racial lines. There are some people on the other side with whom no one in the world is compatible with. There's no one is compatible with these fascists on the right. Nobody in the world is compatible with them. I hear reporters saying that they're in the street, they're talking to Trump supporters, and the Trump supporters really believe that there were some irregularities in this election. That's why they are fired up. That's not true. These people don't believe, they know very well there were no irregularities in this election. They don't believe that. They are using that as an excuse to justify their pressing on for white supremacy. And they are really on the dark side. We are not compatible with them. And so I don't know that it is a question of trying to convince the people who voted for Trump to now do what? They're not going to become Democrats. They're not going to support Biden and Harris by no stretch of the imagination. Trump delivered. Trump may have been the worst president ever. He failed on everything that he was given, except white supremacy. He delivered. All that his followers want is white privilege, white supremacy. They want to be able.
Bob, I think that's an important point I want to expand upon a little bit too, because you talk about the idea of this agenda that's always hidden behind closed doors that we can't see, right? That is clearly rooted in supremacy, is rooted in white supremacy, is rooted in a lot of things that this country has been founded on, right? So we have this idea of we're trying to push forward an agenda to help the Black community through politics, through this new administration, through local talent like we have with Jumani and others that are doing such great work. But then also there's this hidden agenda, right? That's happening behind the scenes that really seems hard to counteract. And when even right before this phone call, before we started, you and Bob, you and I talked about how like where you are actually living right now, or where you currently are, even though New York City is clearly a blue city in a blue state, Long Island and certain other parts are still very much sympathetic to the Republican vote that hides this agenda. So I'd like to just expand, since we only have about 8 minutes left, I want to expand on that just as a sort of a last question for both of you, and also kind of taking from the audience some questions as well. I'm going to kind of fuse this one, my thought and this question from the audience together, which is just thinking about, we have a lot of college students that are watching right now, right? A lot of college administrators that are watching right now. And many of them are wanting to know, like, what is the hope that we have in collectively moving forward, in this climate, the ability to expose those white supremacist systems and structures that are there to keep us oppressed. What do we do? And maybe you might want to address it from a historical point of just where did we go wrong? Where did we not ask for enough? Or you might want to address it from a sort of a future perspective. What can we do to go forward to make sure that we can actually expose the systems that keep us, perpetually marginalized in ways that are obviously detrimental to our community? I think about even just, I saw this little map about the wealth of the 10 richest people in the world, and how the gap seems to be widening even further for like the Jeff Bezoses and the Warren Buffetts and, all those guys. And you look at it, it's like, 10 white men, right? And so we know that at the end of the day, when we're thinking about political affiliation, a lot of times it's because they have, these alliances with people who need to have their money protected and their money growing. And so knowing that we have not historically as Black people had that access to that economic mobility and the access to be able to get into those systems that can really bring equity, so that we're not creating this increasingly wealth gap for us. I mean, by 2050, or I think I heard in some recent article, by 2050, Black people at this rate, there'll be so much of a wealth gap, where I think the majority of Black people will still be impoverished, or will be impoverished by the time it's 2050. And it'll still be impossible for there to be some ground made up. So I'd love to just ask, you both to kind of speak to that. I'm going to say Jade first, and then Bob, as the sort of historian, maybe you can kind of wrap us up for today. But Jade, just talk about that. Like, how do we actually expose the agenda, and what can we do either from a historical perspective or a current perspective to actually, I guess, really put the right education and the right vocabulary in these conversations, so that when you and I are facing these CEOs and we get a chance to have a seat at the table, we're having conversations that really do make movement.
Absolutely. Thank you for this question, and also for the opportunity, Dr. Best, to be on a panel with Representative Jumani Williams, as well as my mentor, Mr. Bob Law. We need to practice self-determination. And when I say self-determination, we as Black people, we need to be able to define our needs. We need to define ourselves and describe our own experiences on our own terms, and not get wrapped up in other people's agendas. Now, to solve the issue and close the wealth gap, I highly recommend that we all read and study Powernomics, which is written by Dr. Claude Anderson, and Mr. Law can tell you more about that. He'll probably mention Powernomics anyway as a solution when he goes, but if not, no pressure, Mr. Law. But we definitely need to figure out ways to close the wealth gap within the Black community and to create generational wealth. Babylon for hundreds of years.
Jade, I lost you for a second. I'm not sure if you can hear us.
I can hear you. I'm here. Hello.
Yeah, just to repeat that last sentence one more time.
Okay. I was saying those of us who have, descended from the killing fields of American slavery, and who have generationally been caught up within the two-party system within America, and have been disenfranchised and cut out of the wealth conversation in general, we need to be able to build a strong Black economy. And so we need to create Black businesses. We need to get into various industries and manufacturing and create generational wealth. Now, on a political and cultural side, what we have to do in terms of practicing self-determination, we have to kind of get away from all of those things that divide us as Black people, right now, I see the biggest threat to the Black family and the Black community is the whole conversation around intersectionality, gender, and sex. I'm seeing slogans out there, and I'm seeing Black women buy into this idea that the future is female. Well, in doing that, and a lot of feminist rhetoric, infiltrating into the Black community, I see that as a huge enemy to Black unity and Black progress. And so what we have essentially is, people making Black men the face of sexual deviancy, or Black men the face of patriarchy, which is by definition white male supremacy, right? Black men, as well as Black women, are victims of white male supremacy, patriarchy. But what we have going on within our community is this sort of gender war that demonizes Black men, that labels Black men, especially heterosexual alpha male Black men, as being toxic. But we're also seeing an increase in toxic femininity and a lot of Black toxic femininity as well, which is counterproductive to progress and nation building in general. And so what we need to do is culturally repatriate. We need to have a paradigm shift where we're able to come together irrespective of socioeconomic class, gender, sexual orientation within the Black community, and adopt a Black first ideology.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. That is some powerful words to wrap up. And that book, one more time, Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. Awesome.
Absolutely, yes.
Put that on our resource list to check out. And we know Dr. Claude Anderson's been a force for many years. We've had him before on a couple of conversations as well. So we appreciate you sharing that perspective. I want to just dig into that a little bit more. And Jade, we're going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but even when you're talking about like group economics and what that looks like, and because I know that there are some fears, especially for many young people who are probably, in a lot of cases, a lot of people I know are the highest earners in their family's history. And so now they're trying to figure out what to do with this economic mobility they're experiencing, and how do we actually engage the Black community in that without feeling like we're going to actually throw our money away, right? And so obviously the book probably expounds on it. You could probably expound on it. But Bob, I want to give you a chance to respond, and then we'll just kind of see if there's any more questions for the audience before we wrap up. But I'd love to hear, Bob, your perspective about what is our marching orders? What is our plan going forward? How do we expose the things that are keeping us and holding us back?
I think that, Jade has really laid it out. And it is already clear moving forward around self-determination, moving forward by using the resources that we have. When you talk about the young people who make up the new modern middle class, they're very different than the middle class of the 1950s that E. Franklin Frazier examined. That middle class was fake. It was all imitating whatever white people were doing on a social level, debutante balls and playing tennis and things, and just imitating white people. But this middle class, as you point out, they actually are professionals and the highest income earners in the history of their families. We have more resources now in our hand. Adam Powell said, "What's in your hand, Black man? Use what's in your hand." We have resources in our hand that we must begin to use in our own self-interest. My concern is how people who have those resources will be hearing from so-called friends and allies that you should not use your resources to benefit your people. You should find a way to use your resources to benefit everybody. You should find out where you fit. There are some other political agendas. I was being interviewed on a radio station in Milwaukee. Bernie Sanders, people were calling in and they were saying that my talking about self-determination was counterproductive, that what we should do is find out where we fit in Bernie Sanders' vision and plug in at wherever we fit. Now, much of that vision came from Jesse Jackson in 1984. Universal Health Plan, that was Jesse in 84, and published it in 1988. It was Jesse who forced Mondale to have a woman as his running mate. The idea of a Black woman, or as a woman as the running mate for vice president didn't come from Biden. Jesse did that in '84. You know, so and I don't think that is a hidden agenda anymore. You know, Trump has made it clear, and the Trump supporters are making it clear. They're not trying to hide it. They are committed only to white supremacy, white dominance over everybody else. They don't care about who builds the wall. They don't care about the children who are separated from their parents. They don't care about the COVID-19. That all of the issues that Biden and Harris and the Democrats are talking about are not issues that the Trumpians have any concern for at all. Trump over the last 4 years has been building momentum and cultivating a nation of people who are committed to racism. They are vulgar. They are vulgar racists. I'm trying to say how to say this, but they are not committed to any of the issues that we are talking about moving forward. They don't care about moving forward. They are people who think that they don't have the capability to be competitive in the 21st century unless they are able to cheat, unless they have special privileges set aside for whites only. So we need to talk about, it's not a hidden agenda. We need to talk about what the real concern is and what the real concerns we have to struggle against. We need to build, see, I believe that there needs to be a revival of righteousness in this nation. That under righteousness comes justice and equality. But if you're talking to someone about an issue and you're telling them, as we have said to young boys, pull up your pants, and make that a whole issue of pull up your pants, and they don't get it, they don't hear it. That's because their mind is too filled with other kinds of toxic ideas. First, we need to renew their mind, and we need to renew the minds of our people. See, we have to stop talking to and finding ways to make whites feel comfortable with us and begin to talk to our own people so that we become comfortable with each other. And then with a renewed mind, we're able to move forward. The civil rights movement had great narratives, visionary leadership. You know, it was a remarkable movement, but as historian and scholar, biblical scholar Gary Dorian points out, with all of that magnificence about the movement, it did not destroy white supremacy because it didn't target white supremacy. It targeted acceptance and assimilation. The civil rights movement accomplished everything it set out to do. It wasn't a failure based on what it set out to do. It challenged the humiliation of racism, but it did not challenge white supremacy. It didn't challenge at the policy-making level. It said we have to vote. And so we secured the vote for everyone. Now we have a need to make sure that we have people worth voting for. Now we have to target policy-making, not just the right to vote. So there's a lot, like I say in your questions, there's a lot to be unpacked in the question, but I believe that we need a movement that places righteousness as a priority and to be truly unapologetically Black, understanding that Black people have a need to repair the damage that decades of racism, centuries of racism that racism has caused damage in the Black community, emotionally, physically, economically, politically, and that damage needs to be repaired. And we need to set out to do that. So when you look at economic development, and what we're calling it is economic revitalization. When we look at that and you look at Powernomics, you know, the first book, Black Labor, White Wealth, that's a good place to start so that people understand that it was Black labor that produced white wealth in the first place. It's Claude's first book. Then Powernomics lays out specifically how to go about it, how to identify industries that we ought to control, how to vertical integration, how we support each other as we develop products, support the products. And there's an article in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago about, I believe it was Chicago. They were looking at either Chicago or Los Angeles and looking at the Black hair care industry. And the article points out that the customers are Black, the employees are Black, but the owners of the Black hair care industry are all Asian. Mm-hmm. And it was not because Black people abandoned the healthcare industry, the hair care industry. There were times when there's a Black woman who had a kind of a comb that they were using. The Asians took over the distribution of the hair care products, and they would not distribute the products that were created by Black people. Theirs was a strategy to gain dominance and control of that industry. It wasn't just happenstance, or Black people just didn't think of it. And so Black people need to now begin with the same aggressiveness to claim and take up the responsibility for redirecting our resources very deliberately. See, those Asians were unapologetically Asian. And they said, we want to control this industry. All the money comes from Black people, but we will control the industry. Black people would say the same thing, and there will be people who will say, no, that's separatism. Whenever Black people start talking about self-determination, we are accused of what they call narrow nationalism. No such thing as narrow nationalism. There's a lot of terms that are invented that, as Jade pointed out earlier, these terms are designed to divide us. Like they talk about being West Indian, and there's West Indian. There's no such thing as a West Indian. That Columbus was looking for India, and they told him that India was in the East, to oversimplify, and we're in the West. Columbus said, okay, then y'all are West Indians. And so then you get people actually embracing Latinx. Where do Latinx come from? What culture is that? What piece of land? Where is that from? Hispanic. Who's Hispanic? Hispanic. A lot of terms that are created and imposed on us so that we don't see our commonality. And so that's part of it. But the point is this: it is necessary, I believe, that we operate from a position of real clarity. And so one of the things that is necessary is that Black folk begin to talk to each other. See, what's during the Civil Rights Movement, the eloquent narrative coming from Dr. King and many others, and it was eloquent, and it made the point very clear, but it was Black people talking to white people on behalf of Black people. The most influential Black personality at that time was Malcolm X. And Malcolm was the only one of them who was not talking to white people on behalf of Black people. He was talking to Black people. And when we have seen Black people resonate with the masses of our people, it has been people, even if they didn't do it forever, it has been people whose message was for Black people around empowering and energizing and emboldening the Black community. When Jesse would talk about back in the 70s, when he would say, I am somebody, Black people knew he was talking to them when he said, you may live in the ghetto, but the ghetto doesn't have to live in you. Black people understood who he was talking to. The same thing happens with Minister Farrakhan. And as they talk to Black people, and that is what I believe has to continue. Claude Anderson. Claude is always talking to Black people. He's not trying to convince white people to love and respect Black people. He's trying to get Black people to love and respect Black people. And that is what really has to happen. One, become, in a very real sense, understand what it means to be unapologetically Black, and be that, and pursue solid ground on which Black people can stand.
Yeah, I love it, yeah. And I think you are hitting to the core of why this program exists. The CUNY Black Male Initiative is here to help encourage not only us to talk to each other, but also us to share the bright lights and talents and gifts and abilities of all these thousands of young people who are here in support and in solidarity of moving forward Black equity and opportunity here at the City University of New York. So I appreciate you all lending your voice and your resources and your idea Just real quick, if you wouldn't mind, just share where we can find you, your social media presence, any projects you have going on right now. I'd love to hear what's happening with you, and so we can follow you, support you, and so on and so forth. So I'll go with Jade first, and then Bob.
Yes, again, Dr. Best, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. If I could add anything, I think it's been time for Black folks to establish their own independent political party. Maybe we can talk about that some other time. Politically, that is a solution. We need to separate from the right wing and the left wing of this white supremacist political two-party system bird that we have been dealing with. So on social media, my YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram is Lioness Crowned with an ED. And then also, if you want to check out some of the work that I do through my company, Victory of the People, you can go over to victorypeoplemovement.com, and you can fill out an inquiry if you're interested in any of our programming or services. Thank you again.
Absolutely. I'm following you right now. I figured this out. So it's great. Fantastic. Great to have you here. And we appreciate you and your voice, Jade, for sure. Bob, where can we find you? Where can we support your work you're doing?
Well, let me just say this. It's too bad that we just brought that up at the end of the conversation. The real solution is we need to create a Black political base of our own. We need a Black political party of our own. Mm-hmm. We can't always be in a position of having to choose what we consider the lesser of two evils. Mm-hmm. I asked on my show once, or maybe I was on Jade's show, somebody's show, and I said, let me have a question for the audience. Why is it that we are always faced with the lesser of two evils as a choice? Why is that? And so we didn't have time to let people respond to that. But we are left with the choice of the lesser of two evils because we have not done the kind of work that is necessary to create an alternative choice. Mm-hmm. And so we really need to build our own Black independent political base, and a base that has some influence, so that when you asked earlier on, how do we hold Black elected officials accountable? We have to have a political organization who says or else. If you don't have an or else, corporations, politicians, everybody will freely dismiss you. Even when your analysis is absolutely correct and undeniable, they will wind up saying, so what? What you going to do? Yeah. We have to be able to say, do this or else we vote you out.
That's so good, because I know that there is some of a subtle belief that I believe that the Democratic Party had, that they thought they had the Black vote wrapped up, right? It was like an automatic given.
So no, they do. Right? Understand this. They do have the Black vote wrapped up. That is why they take Black votes for granted. And if we point that out, any Democrat, any one of them can say, you're right. But so what? What you going to do? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to make a Black educator. I'm not going to let Molefe Asante. I'm not going to appoint Molefe Asante as the Secretary of Education. What you're going to do? So what? I'm not going to take a Black scholar and make that Black scholar the Secretary of Education and give them a mandate to fundamentally upgrade and change the very character of the nation's public schools. I'm not going to do that. So what? And when they say, so what? We say, well, we're going to protest. We're going to get in the street. They say, so what? Mm-hmm. You know, we have to have an or else we will vote you out, or else we will stop buying your product, or else whatever it is. We need a Black political organization to say to local Black elected officials here in New York City, we can go to them and say whatever we want. And we have. We've had some Black folk in Congress in New York City who are pitiful. And we have gone to them, struggled with them. They say, so what? They don't represent the interest of their constituents at all, but we are not in a position to do anything about it. That is what has to change. If we had a Black political organization that had influence in this city, we could say, or else we will oppose you, or support whoever runs against you, or we'll run somebody against you. You can find me at the National Black Leadership Alliance website. And I think you just have to put in the National Black Leadership Alliance. Just Google that and everything comes up.
Perfect. Awesome. And your radio show, can you just remind us one more time where it is?
Well, it's on WBAI for now. It's on WBAI at 99.5 FM on Saturday mornings at 11 a.m.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll be sure to follow you. And I know that a lot of the community here are getting some good feedback from the crowd. And we know that many are going to be inspired by what you've said. And I do believe that, as we're planting these seeds of creating Black empowerment, Black cooperative economics, Black political activism, and using and mobilizing our vote and our voice, I know that, there's already some seeds that are spurning and planted from your voices and your mentorship and your wisdom and your shows that are being dropped into the hearts of our people. And so we appreciate you sharing that, taking the time with us. And for us being the Black Male Initiative at the City University of New York, as I mentioned, we are open to anyone, regardless of their race, their background, their gender, and any other demographic of their dimension of diversity. But we also know that we were designed specifically to help with the population that has struggled the most with retention and graduation rates. And the CUNY Black Male Initiative is designed to move forward Black and brown students to get their degrees and to graduate on time. So we've been able to do that for many years, and we want to keep growing and expanding these partnerships. So for those who are watching out there today, please take a second to just give us some feedback on the survey that we're going to send out to you. Let us know how topics you want to hear about in the future. And we'd love to just stay in touch so you can see what we're doing and all the great speakers that we have coming on each month to share their wisdom and insight and expose our young people and our college administrators to the resources that are out there to support our target demographic and why we're here and why we exist. So thank you again, Jade. I appreciate your time. Bob, thank you so much. And to Jumani, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us for a little bit today. This conversation is the beginning of many we'll be having over the next few years to get ourselves more politically aligned and economically mobile for our community. So until next time, we'll see you all. Thank you for joining us today. And remember, hashtag IamBMI. Follow us at CUNYBMI on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, on Facebook. And please follow us so we can add you to our mailing list and stay in touch for what's coming up in your neck of the woods and coming up in the future.